The silver chalices rang out with a sound like shattering glass, each one brimming with dark liquid that bore no resemblance to wine. Emma's fingers shook as she balanced the metal serving tray through the enormous chamber, taking care not to waste even a single drop of the vital blood that would guarantee her death, or something far worse if squandered. The Scarlet Fortress earned its reputation this evening. Countless flickering flames threw moving shadows across stone walls tinted crimson from generations of feasting, while vampire aristocrats dressed in velvet and brocade reclined on gilded seats like gorgeous predators. Their ghostly complexions appeared to radiate in the wavering illumination, and their garnet eyes monitored every action of the human workers hurrying among tables. "Keep your eyes down," Emma reminded herself, maintaining her focus on the gleaming tiles beneath her feet. "Give them no excuse to single you out." Yet it was impossible not to listen to their conversations. The assaults on the Western Territories have yielded impressive results. A female vampire with silver hair cooed to her associate. "Although I do long for the era when humans resisted with greater vigor, the terror enhanced their blood's flavor tremendously." Her companion's laughter resembled chiming bells merged with cries. "Control yourself, darling. Commander Thane claims the opposition grows more formidable. Before long, we'll enjoy proper sport once more." Emma's teeth ground together as she topped up their chalices. The iron smell of human blood turned her stomach. 4 months she'd existed here. 4 months of acting like another defeated servant, and the impulse to expose her genuine identity intensified with each passing day. The silver marking concealed under her extended sleeve appeared to sear against her flesh, a lunar curve entwined with a blade, the timeless emblem of the Guild of Vampire Slayers. If any of these creatures uncovered her true nature, they'd rip her to pieces before she could draw breath. "You girl." Emma's pulse halted. A vampire lord with merciless emerald eyes stared straight at her, his tone slicing through the surrounding noise. "Additional blood and make it swift." "Certainly, my lord," she murmured, bowing her head obediently while rage burned in her core. This was Commander Thane, one of Lord Darien's battle leaders responsible for the slaughter at Ashbrook, her birthplace. She'd witnessed from the forest as he personally drained her neighbor's young ones. As she rushed toward the serving station, the enormous doors at the chamber's distant end exploded open. The temperature appeared to plunge 20 degrees as every vampire in the space fell quiet and lowered their heads. Vampire King Darien had entered. Even from across the massive chamber, his authority was overwhelming, imposing and powerfully built with raven black hair and eyes like winter tempests. He moved with predatory elegance that made apex hunters appear awkward. His deep navy jacket was stitched with silver threading that seemed to consume illumination, and a crown of darkened iron rested upon his head like a declaration of complete dominance. Emma had only glimpsed him thrice previously, and each occasion she'd been struck by how youthful he appeared, perhaps 28 in human years, despite commanding the vampire realm for more than 300 years. His features were sculpted from stone, magnificent and frightening, with pronounced cheekbones and lips that had never experienced a true smile. "My devoted subjects," Darien's tone echoed through the chamber without him elevating it, demanding focus like a natural force. "This evening we commemorate another triumph against the human insurrection. The settlement of Oak Ridge has collapsed, and their supposed hunter refuge burns as we gather." Emma's blood turned glacial. Oak Ridge, her associate there, Julian, one of the few remaining members of her guild, had been collecting information about vampire vulnerabilities. If they'd discovered him. The vampires burst into cheers and savage applause, but Emma scarcely heard them over the thunder in her skull. She gripped the tray with such intensity her knuckles blanched, battling every urge that demanded she extract the silver blade hidden in her boot and attack. "Not yet," she instructed herself. "You're unprepared. You require additional intelligence, more opportunity to strategize." Nevertheless, Darien persisted, his storm-gray eyes surveying the assembly with calculating coldness. "Troubling accounts have arrived at my attention. Human communities are vanishing more rapidly than our troops can document. Complete settlements disappearing without trace, leaving no survivors, no blood, no proof of our involvement." A wave of bewilderment swept through the gathered vampires. Emma compelled herself to continue moving, refilling chalices and feigning disinterest while absorbing every word. "Some speak of a new participant in this ancient conflict," the Vampire King stated, his tone dropping to a threatening whisper that somehow reached every corner of the chamber, something that preys upon both vampire and human equally. Commander Thane, what intelligence from your reconnaissance? The emerald-eyed vampire rose from his position, his countenance disturbed. Nothing substantial, my lord, yet the circumstances are peculiar. The vanished settlements display evidence of confrontation, but no corpses remain. It's almost as though something gathered them. Gathered them? Emma's thoughts raced. What could cause both vampires and humans to vanish so thoroughly? Increase the surveillance, Darien ordered. I demand explanations, not puzzles. This conflict will conclude with vampire dominance, not disorder. His eyes swept across the chamber one ultimate time, and for a pulse-stopping instant, Emma could have believed his stare lingered on her. But then he pivoted away, advancing toward the elevated table where the most influential vampire lords awaited to present their victories. Emma released air she hadn't realized she'd been retaining and resumed her circuits, mind whirling with inquiries. As she attended the final table near the chamber's perimeter, she caught two younger vampires murmuring in pressing tones. Did you learn about the occurrence at Shadowkeep? One hissed. They discovered vampire corpses emptied of blood precisely like humans. What manner of creature consumes vampire blood? Silence, his associate cautioned. Such discourse approaches rebellion. Lord Darien declares it's human propaganda designed to alarm us. Yet, as Emma glanced back at the vampire king, she observed something others might have overlooked. Despite his commanding authority and assured words, there was strain in the set of his shoulders, a tautness around his eyes that spoke of authentic worry. Whatever was transpiring in the darkness of this conflict, it had even the monsters concerned. And somehow Emma questioned that was favorable intelligence for anyone. The celebration had reached its zenith when catastrophe occurred. Emma was maneuvering between the congested tables, her tray heavy with fresh chalices of blood, when Commander Aldrich, a particularly cruel vampire notorious for his appreciation of human torment, stumbled straight into her route. His pallid face was colored with blood wine, and his actions were lethargic from excessive consumption. "Mind your path, blood servant," he snarled, intentionally driving his shoulder into hers. The collision sent Emma staggering rearward. Time appeared to decelerate as she observed the silver tray escape from her grasp, crystal chalices soaring through the atmosphere in a waterfall of crimson. The precious blood splattered across the white stone flooring and, terror of terrors, directly onto the elevated table where King Darien sat with his inner circle. The complete chamber fell silent. Emma's pulse hammered against her ribs as every pair of luminous eyes turned toward her. The spilled blood spread on the ancient oak table, staining documents and saturating into the embroidered cloth that had likely cost more than most humans acquired in an existence. "You awkward little creature," Commander Aldrich bellowed, his fangs extending in fury. "Do you possess any comprehension what you've accomplished?" "Forgive me, I'm deeply sorry," Emma stammered, collapsing to her knees and frantically attempting to clean the chaos with her apron. "I beg you. It was unintentional." "Unintentional?" Aldrich's laughter was absolute cruelty. "You've polluted the king's table with your human filth. This is rebellion." Emma reached frantically for the scattered chalices, extending across the table to collect the crystal fragments before they could shatter further. In her alarm, she didn't notice her sleeve sliding up her arm as she stretched her reach. But King Darien did. The torch illumination caught the silver marking on her inner forearm, a lunar curve entwined with a blade, and it appeared to pulse with its own ghostly radiance against her pale flesh. The ancient emblem was tiny, no larger than a medallion, but in that instant, it might as well have been a blazing signal. Darien's storm gray eyes expanded, his complete body going stiff as if struck by lightning. "Impossible," he breathed, his tone barely perceptible. Yet others had witnessed it as well. A collective intake of air swept through the chamber as vampire after vampire recognized the marking that had plagued their nightmares for generations. "Slayer," someone shrieked. "She bears the marking of the guild." Pandemonium erupted immediately. Vampires jumped from their positions, hissing and growling, their eyes blazing with blood hunger. Emma scrambled rearward, her sleeve falling to conceal the marking, but it was futile. The secret she protected with her existence was revealed. "Terminate her," Commander Thane bellowed, vaulting over the table with inhuman velocity. "Terminate the Slayer infiltrator." His talons were already extended as he lunged for Emma's throat, murder inscribed across his merciless features. She rolled sideways, barely evading his strike. Yet she understood she was cornered. In moments, they would tear her to pieces. Halt! The command rang out like thunder, freezing every vampire in position. King Darien had risen from his throne, his hand elevated in a gesture of absolute authority. The power in his tone was so overpowering that even Thane stopped mid-assault, his talons inches from Emma's face. "Withdraw," Darien stated quietly, but his words carried the weight of 3 centuries of command. "All of you." "My lord," Thane panted, confusion evident in his tone. "She's a slayer. The marking confirms it. She's been spying on us, gathering intelligence for the opposition. You must do nothing without my directive." Darien interrupted, his stare never departing Emma's terrified face. There was something unreadable in his countenance, not anger, not hatred, but something far more intricate. "This matter requires examination." Commander Aldrich stepped forward, emboldened by his intoxicated state. "Examination, my lord? The consequence for bearing the Slayer's marking is death. It has always been death. To display mercy now would be perceived as weakness by our adversaries." And the temperature in the chamber plummeted. Ice began forming on the chalices as Darien's power radiated outward in waves of barely restrained fury. "Are you challenging my authority, Aldrich?" the Vampire King asked, his tone soft as silk and twice as threatening. Aldrich immediately dropped to one knee, trembling. "No, my lord, pardon me." I spoke rashly. Darien's attention returned to Emma, who remained frozen on the tiles, her thoughts racing with desperate escape strategies that all concluded in death. The marking on her arm felt like it was burning, as if the ancient magic within it recognized the presence of its greatest adversary. "Guards!" Darien commanded without looking away from her. "Escort our visitor to my private chambers. Ensure she's made comfortable." The assembled vampires burst into shocked murmurs. Comfortable? A slayer bearing the marking of the guild was to be made comfortable? "My lord," Commander Thane attempted again, his tone strained with barely controlled aggression. "Surely you cannot intend to." "I intend to do precisely as I've commanded," Darien stated, finally breaking eye contact with Emma to sweep his stare across the stunned assembly. "Anyone who takes issue with my decisions is welcome to challenge me according to the ancient laws." The chamber fell quiet again. The ancient laws meant trial by combat to the death. No vampire had been foolish enough to challenge Darien in over a century, and none appeared inclined to begin now. 2 royal guards approached Emma carefully, as if she might detonate at any instant. She allowed them to assist her to her feet, her legs shaking with adrenaline and terror. As they began to escort her toward the side entrance that led to the royal wing, she caught one final glimpse of King Darien. He was staring at her arm where the marking lay concealed, his jaw tight, and his eyes holding secrets that might be older than the conflict itself. Whatever was about to transpire, Emma understood her existence had just changed forever. The royal chambers were nothing like Emma had anticipated. Instead of torture implements and blood-stained walls, she discovered herself in a surprisingly refined room, filled with ancient volumes, celestial charts, and oil paintings of landscapes she didn't recognize. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting warm illumination across Persian carpets and comfortable leather seats. It felt more like a scholar's study than a vampire king's domain. Yet the man standing with his back to her, staring out the tall windows at the moonlit gardens, was unmistakably a predator. "Sit," King Darien commanded without turning around. Emma remained standing near the door, every muscle coiled for flight, even though she understood escape was impossible. "I prefer to remain standing, Your Majesty." A low chuckle escaped him, still resistant, even facing certain death. Some things never alter. There was something strange in his tone, not the cold cruelty she'd anticipated, but an odd mixture of pain and nostalgia that made no sense. Emma frowned, studying his rigid posture. "You're going to kill me," she stated, surprised by how steady her tone sounded. "So just finish it." Finally, Darien turned to face her, and Emma's breath caught. Up close, his beauty was even more devastating and more terrible. His storm-gray eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of suffering, and there were lines around them that hadn't been visible from across the chamber. "That depends," he stated quietly, "on how you answer my inquiries." He moved to one of the leather seats and gestured for her to take the one opposite. When she hesitated, his expression hardened slightly. "I could have let Thane tear you to pieces in front of the entire court," he pointed out. "The fact that you're still breathing suggests you might want to cooperate." Emma reluctantly sat on the edge of the seat, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Darian settled back in his seat, but his eyes never left her face. "Your name, where you originated from, how you obtained that marking, and most importantly, who dispatched you here." "I'm just a servant," Emma lied. "I don't know what marking you're referring to." "Don't." His tone cracked like a whip. "Don't insult my intelligence. That marking has been burned into my memory for over 300 years. 300 years? Emma's mind reeled. The Slayers Guild kept meticulous records, but their history only went back 2 centuries to the founding after the Great Slaughter. How could Darian have witnessed the marking before the guild even existed? "I can see the questions in your eyes," Darian continued, leaning forward slightly. "You're wondering how I could possibly know about a marking that your precious guild created, aren't you?" "The guild didn't create the marking," Emma stated automatically, then cursed herself for revealing too much. "No," Darian agreed, his tone dropping to barely above a whisper. "They didn't. That marking is far older than your little rebellion. It belonged to someone else first, someone who wore it with honor before your people twisted its meaning into something ugly. Despite her fear, curiosity got the better of her." "What are you referring to?" Darian stood abruptly and walked to a painting hanging above the fireplace. It depicted a beautiful woman with long chestnut hair and kind blue eyes, wearing a simple white dress. But what made Emma's heart stop was the delicate silver marking clearly visible on the woman's inner wrist, identical to her own. "Her name was Liana," Darian stated, his tone heavy with old grief. "She was human like you, a healer, not a slayer. And she bore that marking as a symbol of her calling, to bridge the gap between our peoples." Emma stared at the painting, her world tilting on its axis. "That's impossible. The marking has always been a symbol of the hunt, of the conflict against vampires." "Has it?" Darian's laugh was bitter. "Or is that simply what you've been taught?" He turned back to her, and for the first time Emma witnessed raw pain in his immortal features. 3 centuries ago, before your endless conflict began, some of us believed in coexistence. Liana was part of a group of humans and vampires working together for peace. The marking represented unity, the moon for vampires, the blade for protection, entwined as equals. "You're lying," Emma whispered. But even as she stated it, doubt crept into her tone. "I loved her," Darian continued as if she hadn't spoken. "For 50 years, we worked side by side to end the small conflicts between our peoples. We were close to achieving real peace, so close I could taste it." His hands clenched into fists. "Then came the night of the Scarlet Moon. Liana led a group of humans to our settlement under the pretense of signing a peace treaty. Instead, they carried silver weapons blessed by their priests. They slaughtered children, elders, anyone too weak to fight back." Emma's blood ran cold. "The Great Slaughter." "It wasn't vampires slaughtering humans," Darian finished, his tone sharp as a blade. "It was humans slaughtering vampires. Liana herself drove a silver stake through my brother's heart while he slept, trusting in the peace we'd built." "No," Emma shook her head desperately. "That's not how it happened. The histories say, the histories lie." Darian's eyes blazed with fury and anguish, written by the survivors to justify their genocide. "After that night, I swore never to trust another human. The conflict that followed, that was my response to their betrayal." Emma felt sick. Everything she'd been taught, everything she believed about her heritage and purpose, could it all be a lie? Yet the guild's records were so detailed, so specific. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed to ask. "Because," Darian stated, studying her face with unsettling intensity, "you have her eyes, her defiance, and that marking," he gestured toward her hidden arm, "that marking should have died with her. So tell me, little Slayer, how do you come to bear the symbol of the woman who destroyed everything I held dear?" Emma's mind raced. The marking had been passed down through her family line, always hidden, always protected. Her grandmother had told her it came from the first slayers, but she'd never mentioned anything about peace or unity. "I don't know," she stated honestly. "My grandmother said it marked me as one of the chosen, that it would help me fulfill my destiny to end the vampire threat." "Your grandmother," Darian repeated thoughtfully. "What was her name?" "Helena Ashford." The color drained from Darian's already pale face. He staggered backward as if struck, gripping the mantelpiece for support. "Helena," he breathed. "Lyanna's sister. She was supposed to be dead." The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her, taught her to fight, filled her with purpose, had been sister to the woman in the painting, sister to a woman who'd apparently loved a vampire king. "This changes nothing," Emma stated quickly, but her tone lacked conviction. "Even if what you're saying is true, vampires are still monsters. You still feed on humans, still enslave us. Do we?" Darian asked quietly. "Or have we simply become what you made us? What your people's betrayal forced us to become?" As he spoke, Emma noticed something that made her question everything once again. In the corner of the room sat a small table with children's toys, wooden horses and cloth dolls, clearly well loved. "Whose toys are those?" she asked. Darian followed her stare, and his expression softened. "Orphans from the conflict, vampire children whose parents were killed in human raids. I look after them, a vampire king who cared for orphan children, a marking that supposedly meant unity, not conflict, a history that might be built on lies." Emma's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and she wasn't sure she wanted to know what truth lay beneath the rubble. The next 4 days passed like walking through a minefield. Emma had been given quarters in the servants' wing, a small but comfortable room that felt more like a gilded cage. Guards were posted outside, ostensibly for her protection, but she understood they were really there to keep her from escaping. Word of the Slayer's marking had spread through the fortress like wildfire, and the reaction was exactly what she'd feared. Everywhere she went, conversation stopped, eyes followed her, whispers trailed in her wake. "The king has lost his mind," she overheard Lady Vivienne hiss to her companion as they passed in the corridor. "Harboring a slayer is madness. How can we trust his judgment in the conflict if he shows mercy to our greatest adversaries?" "Perhaps he plans to use her," Lord Marcus suggested, though his tone was doubtful. "Extract information about human strongholds, slayer techniques." "Then why hasn't he started the interrogation? It's been 4 days and she still walks free." The king grows soft. Emma kept her head down and continued walking, but their words echoed her own confusion. Why was Darian keeping her alive? After their conversation about Lyanna and the true history of the marking, he'd simply had her escorted to her room with instructions that she was to be treated as a visitor, no torture, no demands for information, no attempts to use her against the human opposition. It made no sense. "You're the Slayer girl." Emma spun around to find a young vampire barely out of his teens blocking her path. His crimson eyes gleamed with malicious excitement, and his fangs were already extended in anticipation. "Commander Thane says you're responsible for the massacre at Ashbrook," the boy continued, stepping closer. "That your kind butchered innocent vampire families while they slept." "I don't know what you're referring to," Emma replied carefully, though her hand instinctively moved toward the concealed silver blade in her boot. "Liar!" The young vampire lunged forward, but before he could reach her, a firm hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. "Nathan," Darian's tone was deadly quiet. "What did I tell you about approaching our visitor without permission?" The boy, Nathan, immediately dropped to one knee, his bravado evaporating. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I only wanted to." "You wanted to disobey a direct order from your king," Darian interrupted. "Return to your studies now." As Nathan scurried away, Emma discovered herself alone with Darian in the stone corridor. He looked tired, she realized, more tired than an immortal being should ever look. "Your popularity continues to soar," he observed dryly. "Can you blame them?" Emma shot back. "You're keeping their adversary in the heart of their home. Of course they're angry." "And what about you?" Darian asked, studying her face with those unsettling gray eyes. "Are you still convinced I'm your adversary?" Emma wanted to say yes, to hold on to the certainty that had driven her entire existence. But the past few days had shown her things that didn't fit the narrative she'd been raised on. Yesterday, she'd watched Darian personally tend to a group of vampire children orphaned by the conflict. Not the cold calculation of a tyrant, but genuine care. This morning, she'd overheard him arguing with his war council about finding alternatives to raiding human settlements. "I don't know what you are," she admitted. Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. "Good. Certainty is dangerous in times like these." Before she could ask what he meant, rapid footsteps echoed through the corridor. A vampire messenger appeared, bowing hastily to Darian. "Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern border." "Speak," Darian commanded. "The human settlement of Riverside has been destroyed, my lord." But the messenger hesitated, glancing nervously at Emma. "She stays," Darian stated firmly. "Continue." "The village wasn't attacked by our forces. When our patrols arrived to investigate reports of strange lights, they found only ash and bone. No survivors, no blood, no signs of feeding," and he swallowed hard. "They found vampire bodies among the dead, my lord, drained completely dry." Emma felt ice form in her veins. This was the third such incident in as many weeks. Mixed attacks that eliminated both humans and vampires with surgical precision. "Any witnesses?" Darian asked, his tone carefully controlled. "One, my lord. A human child found hiding in the woods. She speaks of figures in dark robes who moved like smoke and carried weapons that glowed with unnatural light. She said they spoke in a language she'd never heard before." After dismissing the messenger, Darian turned to Emma with grim eyes. "Your people didn't do this." "No," Emma agreed, her mind racing. "The guild doesn't use weapons that glow, and we would never work alongside vampires to attack a human settlement. This is something else entirely, something that wants both our peoples dead," Darian murmured. "The question is why?" Over the following hours, Emma discovered herself drawn into war councils she had no business attending. But Darian appeared determined to have her perspective, and gradually she began to see patterns that chilled her to the bone. "Look at the timing," she stated, spreading maps across the table in Darian's study. "Every major escalation in the conflict has been preceded by one of these mixed attacks. The massacre that started the current conflict, the fall of Sanctuary Valley, the destruction of the vampire stronghold at Nightmoor. All of them happened right after mysterious incidents that eliminated witnesses from both sides." Darian leaned over the maps, his shoulder brushing hers as he traced the pattern she'd identified. "Someone is orchestrating this, keeping us at each other's throats. But who benefits from endless conflict? Those who profit from it," came a new tone from the doorway. They both turned to see Commander Thane entering the study, his expression troubled. "Forgive the interruption, my lord, but I've been conducting my own investigation into these incidents." He placed a leather satchel on the table and carefully withdrew several objects, strange coins marked with symbols neither human nor vampire, fragments of weapons made from unknown metals, and what looked like a piece of parchment covered in an alien script. "These were found at the latest attack site," Thane explained, "hidden beneath the ashes, as if someone wanted them discovered eventually." Emma picked up one of the coins, feeling an odd warmth emanating from the metal. "I've never witnessed anything like this." "Nor have I," Darian admitted. "But the implications are clear. There's a third faction in this conflict, one that's been playing us against each other for centuries. The question," Thane stated grimly, "is how deep their influence goes. How many of our conflicts have been manufactured? How many of our victories and losses were orchestrated by these puppeteers?" As Emma stared at the evidence before them, she felt the last of her certainties crumble away. The conflict she'd been born to fight, the adversary she'd been trained to hate, the very foundation of her existence, all of it might be built on lies. And if that was true, then everything she thought she understood about good and evil, about right and wrong, was about to change forever. 2 weeks of working alongside Darian had changed everything. Emma discovered herself spending hours in his private study, poring over ancient texts and tracking the mysterious attacks that plagued both their peoples. What had started as grudging cooperation had evolved into something far more dangerous. Trust. "Here," Darian stated, pointing to a passage in an old vampire chronicle. This describes similar incidents from the early days of the conflict. Dark figures who spoke in tongues unknown, wielding weapons of ethereal flame. I thought it was mythology until now. Emma leaned closer to read the faded text, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from Darian's body. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing him as a monster and started noticing the small things, how he rubbed his temples when he was thinking, the way his eyes softened when he spoke about the orphan children, the careful gentleness in his hands when he handled ancient volumes. "This dates back 300 years, she murmured, "right around the time of Lyanna's betrayal." "It wasn't betrayal," Darian stated quietly, and Emma looked up to find his gray eyes fixed on her face. "I've had time to think about what you stated, about the histories being written by and survivors. What if Lyanna didn't choose to attack us? What if she was manipulated just like we've been manipulated ever since? The possibility hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. If Lyanna had been innocent, if the centuries of conflict had been orchestrated from the shadows, then everything both their peoples believed was a lie." "Tell me about her," Emma stated impulsively. "About what it was like before." Darian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens where phantom roses bloomed in eternal winter. "She laughed at everything," he stated finally. "Even my terrible attempts at human humor. She loved these gardens, declared vampires needed beauty to remember what we were protecting." He paused. "She made me believe I could be more than a weapon forged by centuries of conflict." "What happened to that man?" Emma asked softly. "He died with her." Darian's reflection in the glass looked haunted, or so I thought. "But these past weeks, working with you," he turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her heart race. "You remind me of who I used to be, who I could be again." The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Emma understood she should step back, maintain the distance that was safe for both of them. Instead, she moved closer. "Darian," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. His touch was surprisingly warm for a creature of the undead. "This is madness," he murmured, but he didn't pull away. "Complete madness," Emma agreed, her pulse thundering as she looked up into his storm-gray eyes. The moment stretched between them, electric and impossible. Then reality crashed back as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. They sprang apart just as Commander Thane entered the study, his expression dark with suspicion. "My lord," he stated, his stare flicking between them with obvious displeasure. "The War Council is ready to convene." "Of course," Darian replied, his mask of cold authority sliding back into place so smoothly that Emma wondered if she'd imagined the tender moment they'd shared. "We'll continue this research later." As they filed into the council chamber, Emma couldn't help but notice the hostile looks directed her way. The vampire nobles clearly resented her presence in their sacred planning sessions, but Darian's authority kept them silent. "The human opposition has taken 3 more border settlements," General Mordecai reported, spreading maps across the obsidian table. "They're growing bolder, my lord. Some declare it's because they believe you've gone soft. Let them believe what they will," Darian replied coolly. "What matters is stopping these shadow attacks before they destroy both our peoples." "With respect, Your Majesty," Commander Aldrich interjected. "Perhaps we should focus on the adversary we know rather than chasing phantoms. The humans grow stronger while we waste time on conspiracy theories." Emma felt tension coil in her stomach. There was something in Aldrich's tone that suggested this wasn't merely disagreement. It was challenge. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Darian asked, his tone deceptively calm. "I'm questioning your priorities," Aldrich replied boldly. "You refuse to authorize the final assault on the human strongholds. You spare their settlements when we could crush them completely, and you keep a slayer at your side like some kind of pet." His sneer was directed at Emma. Some wonder if the King of Vampires has forgotten which side he serves. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Emma could see frost forming on the water goblets as Darian's power responded to his anger. "I serve the future of our people," Darian stated quietly, "not the blood hunger of fools who mistake brutality for strength." "The old ways kept us strong," General Mordecai added, emboldened by Aldrich's defiance. "Perhaps it's time to return to them." Emma's blood chilled as she realized what she was witnessing. This wasn't just disagreement about strategy. It was the beginning of a coup. These vampires were questioning Darian's right to rule, and her presence was the catalyst they needed to justify their rebellion. "I think," Darian stated with deadly softness, "this council has forgotten the price of treason." But as his loyalists and adversaries stared each other down across the table, Emma understood with crystal clarity that the political knives were already being sharpened. Darian's protection of her, his refusal to wage total conflict against humanity, had marked him as weak in the eyes of his own people. She'd come here to kill a monster and end a conflict. Instead, she discovered a man trying to save two worlds, and her feelings for him might be the very thing that destroyed him. The forbidden bond between them wasn't just dangerous because of what their peoples would think. It was dangerous because it made them both vulnerable to the real adversaries lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The attack came at dawn when both vampire and human defenses were at their weakest. Emma jolted awake to the sound of explosions echoing across the fortress grounds. Through her window, she could see unnatural emerald flames consuming the eastern wing, and the screams of both vampires and humans filled the air. She grabbed her weapons and burst into the corridor to find chaos. Fortress guards ran in every direction, shouting conflicting orders while servants fled in terror. The acrid smell of burning stone, and something else, something that made her skin crawl, filled the air. "Emma," Darian's tone cut through the pandemonium. He appeared at the end of the hallway, his usual composure shattered. Blood stained his jacket and his eyes blazed with fury. "We're under attack. Something's breached the outer defenses." "The Shadow faction?" she asked, falling into step beside him as they raced toward the sounds of battle. "Has to be. But the timing." His jaw clenched. They hit the human settlement of Oakwood at the exact same moment, coordinated to make it look like we're attacking each other. They burst onto the main battlements to find a nightmare in progress. Dark figures in flowing robes moved through the fortress grounds like wraiths, wielding weapons that glowed with the same ethereal light Emma had witnessed described in the reports. But these weren't just attacking vampires. Human servants were being cut down with equal brutality. There, Darian pointed to a group of robed attackers cornering a cluster of vampire children near the gardens. Without hesitation, he leaped from the battlements, his vampire speed allowing him to land gracefully 30 feet below. Emma followed, using a rope to descend the wall. By the time she reached the ground, Darian was already engaging 3 of the attackers, his movements a deadly blur of precision and power. The robed figures fought unlike anything Emma had ever witnessed. They moved with inhuman grace, but lacked the raw physicality of vampires. Their weapons, curved blades that seemed to be made of condensed moonlight, could harm vampires despite their supernatural resilience. One of the attackers broke away from Darian and came for Emma. She drew her silver blade and met the creature head-on, quickly realizing that her slayer training was perfectly suited to combat these beings. Whatever they were, they had vampire-like weaknesses to silver. "Behind you," she shouted, spotting another attacker flanking Darian. He spun and caught the creature's blade with his bare hands, his vampire strength allowing him to snap the ethereal weapon like a twig. The attacker shrieked, a sound like breaking glass, and dissolved into shadow. Working together, they cleared the garden area and evacuated the children to a secure location. But the coordinated nature of the attack was becoming clearer with each passing moment. "They're not trying to win," Emma realized as they regrouped near the fountain. "They're putting on a show." Darian's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Look at the pattern. They attack vampires in front of human witnesses, humans in front of vampire witnesses. Maximum chaos, maximum blame between our peoples." Her blood ran cold as the full implications hit her. "This isn't about destroying us. It's about making sure we destroy each other." As if summoned by her words, a new voice rang out across the battlefield, amplified by some kind of magic so that every surviving soul in the fortress could hear it clearly. "Behold the alliance of monsters," the voice proclaimed. "See how the vampire king protects his human pet while his people burn." Emma spun toward the source of the voice and felt her world tilt. Standing on the fortress's central tower was a figure she recognized, Commander Vincent, one of Darian's most trusted generals who was supposed to be leading the defense of the northern borders. but beside him stood someone who made her blood freeze in her veins, Captain Daniel Ashford, her own cousin and one of the highest-ranking members of the Slayers Guild. "No," she whispered, but even as denial escaped her lips, the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "Citizens of both realms," Vincent continued, his voice carrying easily across the battlefield, "witness the corruption of your leaders. The Vampire King chooses human love over vampire survival, while the Slayers hide their true nature behind noble lies." Daniel stepped forward, and Emma could see the cruel smile on his face even from this distance. "The time for half measures is over. Only through eternal conflict can both species reach their true potential. Only through endless war can the strong survive." The robed attackers began withdrawing as suddenly as they'd appeared, fading into shadows and leaving behind carefully placed evidence. Vampire weapons near human bodies, Slayer silver near vampire corpses, and scattered papers that would undoubtedly prove secret alliances between various factions. "They've been playing both sides," Darian stated, his voice hollow with realization. "For centuries." Emma's hand shook as she pulled out a piece of parchment that had been dropped near her feet. It bore official Slayers Guild seals and detailed plans for tonight's attack, plans that implicated her as a willing spy sent to weaken vampire defenses from within. "The marking," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. "They used Liana's marking to frame her, just like they're using mine to frame me now." Darian nodded grimly. "A symbol of peace transformed into a weapon of conflict. They've been manufacturing our hatred for 300 years, profiting from the blood and suffering of both our peoples." As dawn broke over the devastated fortress, Emma realized that everything she believed about her purpose, her heritage, and her adversaries had been a carefully constructed lie. The real adversary wasn't vampires or humans. It was the puppet masters who'd been pulling their strings all along. And now those puppet masters were ready for the final act. The Great Hall had been transformed into a tribunal of judgment. Every vampire, noble, general, and courtier in the realm had gathered within hours of the attack. They filled the vast space like a sea of pale faces and burning eyes, their voices raised in angry accusation. At the center of it all, Emma knelt in silver chains before the obsidian throne, while Darian stood trial for treason against his own people. "You have betrayed everything we stand for," Commander Aldrich's voice rang out above the crowd. "While our adversaries plot our destruction, you play house with a Slayer spy." "She saved vampire children during the attack," Darian replied coldly, but his words were drowned out by jeers and hissing. General Mordecai stepped forward, his ancient face twisted with disgust. "The evidence is clear, my lord. Plans bearing her marking detail every weakness in our defenses. She has been feeding information to the human opposition for months." Emma tried to speak, to explain that the documents were forgeries, but the silver gag prevented any sound. The chains burned against her skin, sapping her strength and leaving her helpless to defend herself or Darian. "And what of the witnesses?" Lady Vivienne added, her voice sharp as a blade. 3 servants witnessed you fighting alongside her, protecting her over your own generals. You chose a human over vampires, my lord. That is the definition of treason." The crowd erupted in agreement, their blood hunger palpable. Emma could see the political calculation in their eyes. They'd found the perfect excuse to remove a king they perceived as weak and replace him with someone more willing to wage total conflict. "I have heard enough," Commander Thane announced, stepping into the circle of judgment. Emma's heart sank as she realized that even Darian's most trusted ally had turned against him. "By the ancient laws of our people, I call for the trial of blood and oath." The hall fell silent. The trial of blood and oath was the oldest vampire tradition, a ritual combat where the king's right to rule could be challenged in single combat. If Darian lost, he would die, and leadership would pass to the victor. "You invoke the old ways against me?" Darian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I invoke justice," Thane replied. "Prove your loyalty to our people. Prove that you deserve to lead us. Fight for your crown or abdicate and face exile." Darian's storm gray eyes swept across the assembled vampires, reading the hunger for violence in their faces. Emma could see the calculation in his expression. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and politically isolated. But when his stare found hers, she witnessed something else entirely. Determination. "I accept," he stated, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "but I invoke my right to set the terms. This trial isn't just about my crown, it's about her existence," he pointed to Emma. "If I prove my strength and loyalty through combat, she goes free. And if you lose," Aldrich asked with obvious anticipation. "If I lose, you can have us both." The ritual circle was cleared within minutes. Ancient runes were carved into the stone floor with silver knives, creating a sacred space where only truth could survive. Emma was moved to the edge of the circle, still chained, but now able to witness everything that would unfold. Darian's first challenger was General Mordecai, an ancient vampire whose speed and strength had been legendary for over a millennium. The two warriors circled each other like predators, then exploded into motion. The battle was brutal and elegant, a dance of death that showcased centuries of combat experience. Mordecai was fast, but Darian was faster. When the ancient general finally fell, his neck broken by Darian's bare hands, the crowd's blood hunger only intensified. "Next," Darian called, not even breathing hard. 3 more challengers came forward in succession. Commander Aldrich lasted barely a minute before Darian's claws opened his throat. A young vampire named Stefan managed to wound Darian's shoulder before being impaled on the king's outstretched fingers. Lady Vivienne actually drew blood from Darian's cheek before he snapped her spine with a movement too fast for human eyes to follow. By the time Commander Thane stepped into the circle, Darian was bleeding from multiple wounds but still standing tall. The 2 oldest friends in the vampire court faced each other across the ritual space. "I take no pleasure in this," Thane stated quietly. "Nor do I," Darian replied. "But some things are worth fighting for." Their battle was the longest and most vicious yet. These were warriors who knew each other's every technique, every weakness. They fought with the desperate fury of brothers torn apart by ideology. Each strike carrying the weight of centuries of friendship now turned to bitter necessity. When Thane finally fell, his heart pierced by Darian's claws, the hall was silent except for the king's labored breathing. "Anyone else?" Darian asked, his voice ragged but unbroken. No one moved, no one spoke. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a silver dagger slid across the stone floor to stop at Emma's feet. Her chains had been unlocked during the final battle. She was free to move, free to choose. "The trial demands completion," a voice called out. "Let the Slayer prove her loyalty, to us or to him." Emma picked up the silver blade, its weight familiar in her hands. This was the moment she'd trained for her entire existence, the chance to strike down the Vampire King and end the conflict forever. Darian stood before her, wounded and exhausted, making no move to defend himself. His eyes held no fear, only acceptance and something that looked remarkably like love. "Choose," he stated simply. The blade trembled in Emma's grip as 2 destinies warred within her heart. The silver blade caught the torchlight as Emma raised it high, every eye in the hall fixed upon her trembling hand. Time seemed suspended in that crystalline moment, centuries of hatred and conflict balanced on the edge of a knife. Then she spun away from Darian and hurled the dagger into the crowd. The blade struck true, burying itself in the chest of a vampire lord who had been creeping closer with his own weapon drawn. He crumpled to the floor, revealing the poison-tipped stake he'd intended to drive into Darian's back while all attention was on Emma. "The true adversary has never been vampires or humans." Emma's voice rang out clear and strong across the stunned assembly. "For 300 years, we've been dancing to someone else's tune, spilling blood to line their pockets and serve their twisted agenda." She strode to the center of the ritual circle, her chin raised defiantly. "I am Emma Ashford, bearer of the Slayer's marking, and I choose to break the cycle of lies that has destroyed both our peoples." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion replacing blood hunger as her words sank in. "You witnessed the evidence tonight," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "Vampires and humans working together to orchestrate attacks on both sides. They wear our faces, speak our languages, and sign our names to declarations of conflict we never made. How many of your loved ones died fighting adversaries who were never your true threat?" Commander Aldrich, still alive despite his throat wound, struggled to his feet. "Pretty words from a spy. Then explain this." Darian's voice cut through the hall as he produced the alien artifacts they'd discovered. The strange coins and weapons gleamed with otherworldly light, clearly not of vampire or human origin. Explain how a human slayer came to possess intelligence that helped us identify the real puppet masters. A young vampire near the back of the crowd stepped forward hesitantly. My lord, during the attack, I witnessed something. One of the robed figures dropped his hood when he thought no one was looking. It was General Drake, your own cousin, supposedly killed in battle 6 years ago, and I recognized one of the human attackers, added a fortress servant, her voice barely above a whisper. My brother Daniel, who I was told, died in a vampire raid last winter, but there he was, fighting alongside creatures that killed humans and vampires alike. The revelations came faster now, as more witnesses found the courage to speak. Stories of supposedly dead relatives fighting for the Shadow faction, evidence of coordinated attacks that blamed both sides, a pattern of manipulation stretching back generations. Enough, Darian stated, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. We have all been fools, myself included. The question now is whether we choose to remain fools or finally witness the truth. He extended his hand to Emma, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together, they faced the assembled court. I propose an alliance, Darian announced, not between master and servant, conqueror and conquered, but between equals fighting a common adversary. Those who wish to continue the old ways of endless conflict may depart now with safe passage. Those who choose to build something new, stay. The hall erupted in arguments, accusations, and heated debate. But gradually, a pattern emerged. The younger vampires, those who had grown tired of constant conflict, began moving toward the center of the hall. Some of the older nobles walked away in disgust, but others remained, their ancient faces thoughtful. Over the following weeks, what became known as the Blood and Silver Accords took shape. Human settlements that had been under vampire control were granted self-governance in exchange for voluntary blood donations from willing donors. Vampire strongholds opened their libraries and healing knowledge to human scholars. Joint patrols hunted down the Shadow faction with ruthless efficiency. The conflict didn't end overnight. There were setbacks, betrayals, and moments when everything nearly collapsed. But each victory against their true adversaries strengthened the fragile alliance. Captain Daniel Ashford and Commander Vincent fell in a final battle at their hidden fortress, their conspiracy dying with them. Documents found in their stronghold revealed the stunning scope of their manipulation. False flag operations, manufactured atrocities, and carefully orchestrated escalations that had kept two peoples at each other's throats for centuries. 4 months after the trial of Blood and Oath, Emma stood beside Darian on the fortress balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She no longer wore servant's clothes or chains, but a dress of deep sapphire silk that marked her as Darian's equal and partner. Any regrets? Darian asked softly, his arm around her waist. About which part? Emma smiled. Choosing to trust a vampire king, or discovering that everything I thought I knew was a lie? About this, he stated, lifting her hand to his lips and gently kissing the silver marking on her inner wrist. The ancient symbol seemed to shimmer in the morning light, no longer a brand of conflict, but a bridge between worlds. Where once it had represented division and hatred, it now stood for unity and hope. None, Emma whispered, leaning into his embrace as dawn broke fully over a landscape where humans and vampires worked side by side in the fields below. The conflict was over. The real conflict could finally begin. If you enjoyed this tale of love transcending ancient hatred and uncovering the truth behind centuries of lies, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more epic stories of romance, betrayal, and redemption. What would you have done in Emma's position? Would you have thrown the dagger or used it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, may your choices always lead you to the truth.